1995, Matt, you took a chance on a then little-known company called Amazon. Kudos to you, my friend. What an amazing investment. Matt, you're with our work-shifting conversation right now. And clearly, some good news helping the stock on the back of today. There's the news around the Pentagon as well. But if you're Andy Jassy, and I'm sure you know him well, and he's a man who got on board when the company went public, what are his key focus points right now?
Well, I think he's already accomplished one of the most important ones, which is bringing back two really important people to the team, and Adam Selipsky to run AWS. Adam was his right-hand person in that organization for its first 10 years. And then Jeff Blackburn, who, of course, built a whole bunch of the digital businesses as well as ran corporate development. So for Andy to be able to move into this role, this new role of CEO, to have two trusted partners that have come back into the organization really gives him leverage.
How much is a trusted person Andy Jassy at the moment, particularly as we go into new regulatory conversations? He's the new face. How well is he known already by that sort of community, do you think?
Well, I think that is exactly the right word, Caroline. I think trust and transparency are the two things that Andy is going to need to focus on both internally and externally. And it's really interesting to look at these two new corporate principles that were put out just last week. And you see the words empathy in the one that's employee focused, and you see the word humble in the one that's externally focused. I think those are very intentional choices of words. And Andy is a person that I think people find is easy to trust. He's got a set of attributes that combines kind of a real genuine authenticity with very high expectations. But now he's going to have to extend that into a much broader set of areas, in addition to the one that he built, which is AWS, kind of led and built, but into all these other parts of the business. And to your point, a lot of external audiences as well.
What other sort of cylinders can he fire up? AWS, of course, has been powering part of the growth story for Amazon, but now, they're ever expanding the area of e-commerce, looking at fashion, looking at other parts. Where do you think where do you think Amazon really goes? Because they've not always fired straight and true. I mean, they went into hardware, and that didn't always pay the dividends they wanted.
Well, the interesting thing there is that they've had, successes in hardware like Kindle and then things like the Fire phone that didn't work at all. But rather than stopping there, they continued on and invented the Echo and the whole Alexa ecosystem. So I think they're very comfortable with pioneering and innovating and trying new things and then trying to learn from the things that don't work rather than give up. Here's a good example, healthcare. I think that is an area of massive opportunity for Amazon. You saw just today that they announced an at-home, $40 kit for doing COVID testing. And that's just one of many examples, but it wasn't but a couple of years ago when they had this unsuccessful venture, this Haven venture that they were trying to do with Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway along with JP Morgan. And yet I think that in the healthcare area, whether it's in things like this testing service that they just launched or their own prescription drug offering that they acquired in PillPack, or some of the other things that they're working on with direct care to employees and now people even outside of the employee base of Amazon, there is a lot of opportunity to reinvent in the area of healthcare. And I think that's one of the high ones on the list.
Will you want to see them do M&A to scale in those sorts of areas, or is it always about organic growth when it comes to Amazon?
I think it's usually a combination. I do think Andy has historically been pretty frugal. I think the company has been overall, but I think that he's been comparatively frugal around acquisitions within AWS. You can't really think of any major examples of acquisitions within AWS. It'll be interesting to see how that translates. I think they try to keep an open mind, and there have been times, Whole Foods, they spent almost $15 billion for, or PillPack was a very young company that they spent $1 billion on investing in buying that company. So I think they'll keep an open mind on acquisitions. The interesting thing when we come back to AWS, as you asked before, is what are they going to do at the application level? When you think of AWS in terms of the things that they have built themselves, it's been mostly at the infrastructure and kind of enabling technologies level. They don't really have a lot of big successes. There's a few smallish examples within the application layer. And that's where a Microsoft, a Google, even a Salesforce are both competitors and in some ways collaborators. And then you ask the question, well, is that going to be an area where they partner in interesting ways with companies out there that complement them, like a Smartsheet and a Salesforce, which they just announced a deeper partnership with? Or do they ultimately have to go buy some companies to really build up their application stack within AWS?
And of course, we know that any acquisition they do make is going to be under heavy regulatory scrutiny as well, as they currently are with MGM. I'm interested, Matt, to sort of finish it off, your knowledge of the characters involved and your knowledge of the culture that has been brought to Amazon, how does that continue to iterate, do you think?
Well, there's always been a focus on the customer first, and people say that, and in Amazon, they live it. And so that is going to stay. It's going to be strengthened under, Andy's leadership. I do think going back to these words like empathy and humble, I might add authenticity, and the output of that of earning trust. How does that manifest itself in a deeper way with employees, with these external parties, whether it's the government or the media or others, and equally importantly, with just other partners? I have this kind of concept of how do you build a sustainable ecosystem? Amazon's less a platform company like Microsoft than it's a sustainable ecosystem company. And I think some folks would say, hey, they haven't done it very sustainably. In other words, they've sort of taken too much from the ecosystem versus building out an ecosystem that can have a flywheel effect that is continuously sustainable and kind of a win-win-win. That's going to be the operational challenge that Andy and his teams face.